of pecuniary interests? Okay, seeing none, we do have to hold the public meeting, of which BM Ross are going to manage it and present to us a report on and their findings on municipal class environment assessment for our wastewater treatment plant. It's no secret that these technical discussions have been going on behind the scenes, and we're at the stage now where more information can be shared both with council and with the public. And we're anxious to hear the report, hear the findings, and I suspect it will be an interesting and fruitful discussion over the next hour and a half, perhaps 2 hours. So with that, I think I'm turning it over to Matt first.
Thank you, Mayor Kathy. Hello, everybody. Yeah, we last saw you just a little over 2 months ago, and we had our public meeting and presented work going on in the Class EA at that time. As the mayor alluded to, we have another technical report and a lot of information to pass on. And if you'll recall, back in August, I threatened that at some point we'll get to a point where we're going to need a decision out of the council on how to proceed further. And it's all about sizing and what gets built. So that's where we are today. We're going to talk about things like effluent quality criteria, expansion options, and staging things and how we prepare the Class EA for that, and we'll have some recommendations. That next slide, Lisa, I just want to bring you up to date on our progress. Yeah, there it is. So we've had this since the start of this thing. We just want to show you where we're going. We're actually doing pretty good on the timeline. These usually go out the window after the first meeting or two. We've done really well on it. We're in phase three. We're identifying and evaluating alternative design concepts, and we've had a bunch of work done. And one of the things that you've got in front of you that was sent out with the presentation are the meeting notes from our technical team meeting 5 a month ago, and it's a technical memo about what we're going to talk about today. And we thought it would be good to have in front of everybody. As Steve goes over what's in it and where we're leading to. We'll tell you about next steps later, but we're getting fairly deep into this now. The information and the decision we're not even considering you make a decision today, but in the nearer future, you're going to have to make a decision so that we can proceed with the rest of the EA and write the report around that decision. And it's all about what gets built and the size it gets built and why. So having said that, it looks like we're still aiming for an early spring finish on this and moving forward with the project. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve Burns. He's been working on all the technical stuff on this project, and he's going to take you through the design memo and the rest of the presentation till the end. Okay.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, as Matt indicated, we back in early October, we published a memo looking at staging opportunities, costs related to that, and also potential process changes, like changes in terms of how we treat the waste. So some of this was actually presented at the last public meeting. But some of it is actually new information that has been sort of advanced since that time. So there's a couple of specific things out that I'll talk about. One is the opportunities to stage the expansion of the plant and the potential to change how we treat the waste and look at the pros and cons of that. Now, one of the things I will talk about is that the plant is currently built with 2 what we call treatment trains. It is your plant is a tertiary level plant, but within the plant there is what is referred to as the secondary process, and that process, that part of the plant has 2 trains. So each of those trains, in effect, treats 50% of the waste. The actual technical name for how we treat the waste is a process called extended aeration. And I won't get into the details of that. I can, but I don't plan to get into the details of what that really means. But that term will come up a little later. The key capacity numbers are today the plant is rated at 1,700 cubic meters per day as an annual average flow. We project that when we get to determine what is, we get to January and we determine what has happened in 2021, we'll see that the average was somewhere in the order of 1,300 cubic meters a day. We have forecasted that 25 years from now, we will need capacity of 2,420. Next slide, Lisa, please. So this, and this is just a picture of those same numbers. So what is being plotted across the bottom here is the year time, and vertically it is what we expect the annual average flow will be each year. The County of Middlesex provided some growth projections for each community in the county, and these are and they predicted certain growth, potential growth for Lucan and Biddulph, and they provided 3 different kind of growth forecasts, low, high, and one somewhere in the middle that they referred to as reference. We, in our study, are only focusing on the high growth line. Our recent history in Lucan is that you are marching along at or slightly above the high growth line, and we forecast, we're really planning that will continue on into the future. So we are not in our study at this point looking at lower growth alternatives. The horizontal yellow line is that existing plant capacity, and you'll see that plant capacity line and the high growth line cross somewhere around 2029. So about 8 years or so from now, you will have sewage flows that are at that capacity. So right now we're operating at somewhere less than about 80% of the capacity. But what is important, and will come up in the discussion here, is that if you add what is approved for development, already approved, and allocate a sewage flow to that approved development, you're actually at about 97% of that existing capacity line. So you're very quickly, perhaps by the end of this year, sometime early next year, you will be fully allocated. So it could be viewed that the plant will soon be at capacity and needs to be expanded to allow you to continue to permit additional development approvals.
Steve, can I just interrupt you for 1 second? I see Councillor Regan has his hand up.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. So I'm not sure if this is for Steve or for Ron, and I appreciate you letting me interject, Madam Mayor. When I'm looking at that average annual flow by year, a couple of questions. Who controls the growth rate? Is it the municipality? Is it the the province? Is it the county? And I'm wondering about that growth rate, that low growth, because I'm just listening to what you're saying. If our decision, and if I'm wrong, tell me, maybe Ron can help me, but our decision about this is going to be based on growth rate. If we take charge of that growth rate, that decision is going to sort of influence what we decide in the next month or 2 months, or whenever we have to make a decision about expanding this plant. Like if you understand what I'm saying. So I'm just wondering that those lines, those projections, I mean, when you say low growth, can it be lower than that? Is it something we can control? And I mean, and what I'm hearing, and if I understand what you just said, it kind of freaked me out a little about with our allocation, we're at 97% of our capacity. So I'm just wondering, do we need to slow down the growth? Do we need to take a little better control of this? I'm not sure. So just let me know if I'm out of line here, but this is what I'm hearing. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, if I can maybe, these are three guesses is what they really come down to at the end of the day. And these reference numbers are partially, and Dan Fitzgerald can correct me if I'm wrong, they're based on the numbers that the consultant for the county did. So if you remember, the county had a consultant come in and do growth projections over the next 25 years, and we had to follow in line with that. So the high growth line that you see here, the gray line, is the one that we're most closely following right now. But to say, do we control growth? I guess to a certain degree, we like the township can, but at the end of the day, it's kind of market driven, right? If you could tell me what the interest rates are going to be in the next year, whether we're going to slide into a recession, whether inflation continues to be a problem, all these factors will play into how quickly things grow. So to a certain degree, you're at the mercy of the market. At this point, there's lots of development land that has been bought up by developers. So they're presupposing what's going to happen and what's going to continue to happen. So we fully expect the growth to continue, but don't get too nervous when Steve said 97%, because right now we're at about 80. I think Steve, you said about 80% capacity in there, and for the draft plan approved developments, that will bring us to about 97%. Okay, does that help a little bit? So we're not at 97% capacity right today. We're about 80%. But if all the developments that are approved get built out, that will bring us to about 97% is the point Steve's trying to make.
Sorry, if I may, Madam Mayor, just to follow up. So Ron, I'm just sorry. So what we have on the books right now for growth would take us to 97%.
Correct. I'm looking for a nod of the head from Jeff, because that's there he is. Yep. Okay, thumbs up.
Okay, that's just concerning to me. I don't know if it just sounds very, 3% margin is sort of, so what happens after that point? I guess
that's really why we're doing this process today.
Yeah.
That's why we're doing it now, so we can be prepared.
All right. And that growth, again, just one more, sorry, what that growth, so when we're talking about what's on the books now, how far out does that take us now? Does it take us out 5 years, 6 years, 7 years? Do we know?
Well, that's that depends on how quick the developers get moving. So
Okay. All right.
So if I can add to it, Dan, just to make it a little simpler. Yeah, that growth will take you out, as Steve said, to 2029 at the pace it's been going. Right. So your plant essentially can't take any more capacity after that or any more flow. It can, but to simplify this, you have to expand the plant one train, and you'll hear this.
Okay.
Just to move forward. Right now, you can't, technically approve very much more development. So you're shutting the door on future development if you don't approve anything. So I think your bigger decision comes on whether you do more than one train, which would take us to 20, whatever Steve will talk about.
2045, I think.
Yeah. So I mean, you've got to expand it at least one to keep council's ability to allocate anything. I mean, council can't allocate beyond the 100%, right? You shouldn't, unless you know you're building a plant. You know, it's got a shovel in the ground somewhere, just because. Yeah, but we still have this slack time. I mean, it's not gonna be sewage flowing in the streets or anything. You know, you've got at least 7.5 years here.
All right, all right.
I
Thank
think
you, Matt. Thank you, Ron.
Sorry, I was just going to add, I
Okay.
believe, and Dan Fitzgerald and both Matt can maybe pipe in here as well, but the township is obligated under planning, the Planning Act, to have enough land available for development. So we're obligated to do this process and to continue.
Yeah, I'd agree. I can't remember the exact years. Dan will know better, but you're actually supposed to have a service land available too on a shorter time frame, and then a longer time frame lands, that you would service later. Yeah.
Yeah, through the chair to council. So that's correct. So it's a 3-year serviceable capability. So you have to have a 3-year land supply developable, and then a 10-year supply for future expansion.
So Steve, I guess just before you go on, do you want to do your presentation and then entertain questions? Or are you okay if somebody's got a question interjecting like we just went through?
I'm quite all right with interjecting, because I think it's important that people understand what we're doing. This is complicated, so interjections are great.
Okay.
On this particular issue, I think it's important to kind of hold this in your mind, because it comes up later again in the presentation and ties into our recommendation. But it's good to get the questions out of the way as we go along. And there are a couple of points where I will actually ask for questions a little later, but any time is good. I can't see when an arm is raised up, so you just interject.
We'll keep an eye out,
Thank
but
you.
if somebody's missed, then as you said, just jump in. But I'll
Okay,
keep
thank you,
an eye
Steve.
out.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay, next slide. So we've talked about existing capacity and the extent that it's used and so on. So what the discussion now, or presentation now, is more about future capacity. And the capacity of a wastewater treatment plant is put into what's called an environmental compliance approval. Every plant has an ECA, and that ECA stipulates a flow that is you're allowed to have coming into the plant, and it also stipulates the quality of the effluent going out. And the quality I refer to as it's effluent quality criteria. EQC is typically the short term. The flow value is an annual average. So you add up the total flow from January 1 to December 31st, divide by 365, and that's the number that is typically presented in the ECA. Now, there are different parameters that you have to test for in the effluent, but in almost every instance in Ontario, the controlling parameter is phosphorus, total phosphorus TP. The technology exists to reduce phosphorus concentrations down to very, very low levels. But that technology is very expensive. And if we stay with the existing technology, which is proven, that extended aeration process, the maximum approvable discharge is about 2,700 cubic meters a day. So that kind of sets an upper limit for us with the existing technology. If we want to move that number higher, we cross a threshold where it becomes, we have to introduce technologies that are much, much more expensive. And I'll expand on this a bit. That the critical parameters in the discharge are nitrogen and phosphorus. And both of them are nutrients. So the Lucan plant is discharging into the Little Ausable River. This as a stream, it has very low flows, and it is very much influenced by the plant, by the existing discharge. We see that already. The plant in its current ECA has permission to discharge about 0.5 kilogram of phosphorus every day. So visualize a bag of sugar. A bag of sugar is 1 kilogram, I think. And so you can discharge about 0.5 bag of sugar of phosphorus into the plant, into the stream every day. That's been approved. But you're actually only discharging about 1/4 of a kilogram. So the difference between that 1/4 and that 1/2, which we're allowed, is what we can take advantage of going forward. So the ministry won't let us increase that 0.5 kilogram, but they'll let us move up to that number. And so by doing that, we can take that 1,700 and move, and with the existing technology, move it up to 2,700 and be able to discharge more flow with the existing treatment process. I mentioned nitrogen is another parameter of interest. The ministry the plant right now has no effluent quality criteria for nitrates. And the ministry has indicated they're not going to require them, but they will want you to think about that for the future. And what they're going to ask for is that you monitor nitrates upstream and downstream of the plant and periodically report on those values, so that sometime in the future, in a future expansion or modification, we won't be talking about phosphorus, we'll be talking about nitrates. And all the other parameters in the ECA, and there's a number of them, that will really get left at the current values. So next slide. So what's this 2,700? How significant is it? So it gets us 1 or 2 years beyond 2046. So 26, 27 years from now, we expect the flows will be 2,700 cubic meters a day. So it's not really a constraint to growth. And something else that's really important here is that there is the potential that the plant can actually be operated to reduce the existing phosphorus concentrations in the discharge. So, and if we can do that, then there's a potential that the plant could actually be re-rated in the future. So the door is open. So even though we're planning on the same level of treatment, in terms of setting that 2,700 value, time may well prove that we can do better. The issue of nitrates and the future criteria for that is something that we need to pay attention to now, but it's not going to be a factor in the design. It might be a factor in terms of the actual detail of what we build, but it is not a big thing to be keeping in mind at this point. So I think the key point of this 2,700 number is that it reduces the benefit of having 4 trains. And I will get into that in a little more detail. But like, for example, right now with 2 trains, we feel the actual treatment capacity is about 1,650. Each treatment train can treat 825. So if we go to 3 trains, we get to 2425, 2,425 cubic meters a day, which is less than the 2,700. And that sort of introduces the idea of staging. That is potentially stage 1 to 2425. And then stage 2 would take us to 2,700. If we build 4 trains, we actually create capacity for 3,300, but we can only get approval for 2,700. So we've built capacity for a bigger number, for actually about for a bigger number than the 25% capacity. Okay, I'll back up a little bit. In effect, we would only be able to get credit for about 25% of the capacity of that 4th train. And again, I'll get into a little more detail on this later, but by being restricted to 2,700, it's reducing the benefit of that 4th train and canceling out some of the benefit of spending the money to do that. So next slide. So in going forward in discussing how what are the options here in terms of expansion, we still have this 1 train, 2 train question out there. With 1 train, we'll get to 2475. With 2 trains, we can't get beyond 2,700. But we can change, and there's also the opportunity to change how we treat the waste, the technology. And I mentioned that the current process is called extended aeration. The plant can be converted to something called IFAS, integrated fixed film activated sludge. Let's call it IFAS. It's a newer technology that allows us to expand. The IFAS there's a number of different kind of sub-technologies, different ways to do this. It is a newer way of treating wastewater, but it's really a combination of 2 much older, much proven ways. There are fewer examples around to judge how well this works, but there are examples, and I believe over the next 10 or 20 years, we will see this IFAS implemented much more frequently and probably take over eventually from the use of extended aeration. What's important is that IFAS will not give us better treatment, but it will allow us to have more treatment within a smaller or the same footprint. So next slide. So just to give you an idea what this really looks like, is we take part of the secondary process, the aeration tank, and we put media into that tank. And by putting that media in, it means we can treat more waste in the same tank. And that's all that's IFAS is really doing. So that media is an older technology. The tank itself and how we do it today is an older technology. But combining the two is a more modern idea. And it's been out there for at least 15 years. So it's not brand new by any shape or form. And we're seeing more and more examples of where it's actually built. So next slide. So in terms of the plant itself, what's this really look like? So this picture is kind of small, but we see the aeration tanks sort of kind of center left. Yep. And if we're thinking about staging construction, we would build aeration tank number 3. Aeration tank number 3 will get us to 2,475 cubic meters a day. We would also build clarifier 3, just a little to right. Yeah. The two go together, they form the train. And then if we want to get to 2,700, we build the 4th aeration tank and the 4th clarifier, the ones that we call future. So it's those. So by the time we get to 2,700, we got four of those structures. So next slide. Is that the next slide? Yeah, here we go. Good. But with IFAS, what we're doing is putting the media in the tanks. And to get to 2425, we still need to build 3 tanks and put media in them and 3 clarifiers. But when it comes to expanding to 2,700, we don't need to build a 4th tank. We would just build 3 tanks. We'd still have 3 tanks. We would add more media, but we would build a 4th clarifier. So that the advantage then really with an IFAS approach is it eliminates in the future the need to build that 4th tank. You have the expense of adding the media, building the clarifier, but no 4th aeration tank. So that's why we look at this technology. And the benefits of this really you'll see in the next slide. So we put some dollars to all of this because in the end, the decision on how you approach it, will depend on a number of things that you would consider, but money is certainly part of that. And the dollars here are what we have currently estimated are the total cost of expansion. These costs are preliminary and they may change, but what's important is I don't think the difference between each option will change very much. I think the differences, I'm more comfortable and confident of the differences than of the total number. So total might change. We come back in 2 months with a final presentation. The numbers might be a little different, but the differences would still be there. So if we stage construction and design for build for 2475, IFAS will actually cost us more money. by $500,000 more. It's not in terms of percentage, it's not a huge amount.
Can I ask a question, Steve?
Sure.
It's Daniel. Madam Mayor, may I go ahead? I'm just wondering if, Steve, if we built one train, if we just go with one train, can we convert to the IFAS instead of going to the fourth train?
Yes. Yep. And I will, that's part of something I'll mention later, but absolutely right.
I'm sorry, I'm just getting ahead of it. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
The actual tank is the same. And so the door is open to convert in the future. But in terms of the thinking of staging, this is where these numbers are important. Because if we build initially for 2,700, not 2,475, but 2,700, so in effect, not staging, then we increase the cost, depending on how we do it, somewhere in the order of $4 or $5 million. So we've only increased the capacity by about 10%, but it has cost us an extra $4 or $5 million to do that. But we do see that in the future, at that 2,700 cubic meter a day number, IFAS is actually a lesser cost alternative by about $1 million. So the changing the process technology is a good thing to file away for future reference and expansion ideas, but in the short term, it has limited advantage. So, next slide. So we still come back to the original two questions. Do we expand in stages? Does that make sense? And do we change the treatment process? So that's where I'm going to go into the kind of the pros and cons of these things right now. So if we stage it, with first stage being 2,475 and the second stage up to 2,700, that staging saves us $4 to $5 million in the short term. It defers that cost. It's not, in the end, ultimately, it's not a saving, but it's a deferral of cost. And we defer that cost based on the growth projections for potentially 14 or 15 years. Now, maybe we'll lose some economy of scale, but I think that's a minor consideration here. This is a big project. And so often we pay attention to, that you make a project bigger to take advantage of economy of scale. I don't think that's much of an issue here. Now, the second point, though, is that if by staging it, by building less capacity, we increase the risk that council is going to run out of the ability to approve new development proposals sooner. And that is to be the greatest risk that comes out of staging. And I'll again talk more about that later on. Staging, which gives us a lower initial capital, reduces the risk of having to carry more debt, if growth actually is slower. So staging is an advantage if there's any concern that growth might slow. Staging creates flexibility, more flexibility if the effluent quality criteria are changed. And this is that issue again out there with nitrates. Ministry is going to want us to monitor nitrates. They could at some point come in and say, we want to change the criteria here. Now, I don't think that event would occur for at least 10 or 12 years. So it's not a short-term thing that they might come along. But and there's also the possibility that, there might be a more emerging technologies that we'd want to take advantage of. So by staging, we give ourselves a little more flexibility. And if either of those things happen, staging is better for process control. If you build facilities and then only operate them at a fraction of their capacity, gets a little trickier to operate. But having extra facilities is always better in terms of backup and redundancy. But again, this is not a big issue. It's down in the list here, but it's something we pay attention to. And there's always the question about, if we stage it, how does that affect future approvals? Is the ministry, after we get approach 2475, is the ministry going to want to change the criteria when we go back? And we think that's not an issue here. We can get approval for 2700 so that we're not, future approvals aren't really affected by the fact that we want to build it in stages. So next slide. So no, go back. There we go. Good. So the real, I think, critical issue here that links to the staging question is this issue of running out of the ability to approve new development. That will happen sooner with a smaller plant. So next slide. So how critical is this risk? And so what I'm just going to talk about here is a future scenario that is really very similar to where you are today. You now have uncommitted capacity of 45 equivalent residential units. So this is the 90, so that 45 is the 3%. You have committed, you have approved development up to within 45 units of your existing capacity. So you're fairly quickly going to run out of ability to approve, even though we won't be at the actual flow capacity of the plant for another seven or 8 years. So we're looking at kind of two definitions of capacity. One is the actual plant capacity, which its ability to treat, which is kind of Renee's interest, Aqua's interest. And then the other one is the ability to approve development, which is council's interest. And so I was trying to come up with a way to relate these two things, these two definitions of capacity. And one of the things that we established was that over the last 4 years, at the end of the year, council has averaged about 360 ERUs of committed development. So you've been running with it. Look at this number in terms, and consider it an inventory. Council has been working with an inventory of about 360 units, and sort of maintaining that through time. Next slide. So this goes back to that original slide where we talked about where we talked about growth, and there was a low growth line and a high growth line and so on. This slide only shows the high growth line. As I mentioned, we're not planning for scenarios other than high growth. So it shows the high growth line, and it shows that it'll cross the existing capacity at about 2029. But it won't, 2029, but it is also showing that if we add our 360 units of commitments, kind of average commitments, we're actually going to cross that line next year, right there. Yeah. So that's the present scenario. Because of the commitments, which is the gray shading, we've run out of the ability to commit. So if we work from the assumption that we want an inventory of 360, and we stage construction, so we build for 2475, it'll show that we're going to run out of the ability to commit, approve more development in about 2039. So that's 18 years from now. So we'll be at the present scenario where we are today about 18 years from now. Now, what will future councils, how will they view this and address this? Well, about 2036, they will have to make a decision to proceed with an expansion in order to maintain their ability to continue with an inventory. And they would make that decision about 2036, because it'll only take about 3 years to put in place that capacity. We have approval for 2,700, and there they'll implement stage 2. So the design construction planning for stage 2 would begin 2036. So that's still 15 years from now.
Steve,
Yep.
just on that point, I guess, is that a reasonable time frame to be planning for? Is that something, or typically, do you see this sort of expansion lasting longer than having to have that discussion in 15 years? Or is that a typical timeline, if you can understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand. I don't know whether to say it's typical.
Okay, is it reasonable? Is that a reasonable?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, is that reasonable?
That's right. Is it a reasonable number? Personally, I think it's reasonable. It's almost three. If you view generations are 20 years, it's 3/4 of a generation. It's quite a ways away. I think it's a reasonable number. Another way to view this is that 360 units of inventory, is that a good number? Is that a necessary number? It's what you've been doing. So I'm presenting a picture here of, if you continue with kind of the status quo in your inventory, this is a scenario that will roll out. If you're comfortable with a lesser inventory, all these time frames advance to the right, so get longer. But if you felt you wanted a shorter, like a greater inventory, everything moves to the left. Now, whether 360 is the right inventory number is kind of a planning question, a development question, more than an engineering question. And I don't know whether it's appropriate, but it has been what you've been doing. And so I view that as councils over the last several years have been fairly comfortable with that number. So if we view that as a comfort level, then this is how the scenario that plays out. By going to 2475, to me, you're out 15 years before you need to actually act on something. I think that's a reasonable time frame. But this is an important time here to sort of pause and talk about this. So are there any questions, other questions?
Well, I'll just add, Steve, and for the planning side of it, like 360 is about 10% of your existing developed base already. So you're planning ahead, constantly carrying an extra 10%. So is that reasonable? Is that unreasonable? It's certainly a lot more than you carried the 10 years before everything got excited around Lucan. You never had that much in the bag, sort of thing. So is it reasonable? And if it is, you've got a plan for it. The mayor asked about, is it reasonable or should it be a longer planning period? Well, it's driven a lot by the constraint of you have to build a train or two trains. And one train will take you to this. And if you want more, it's easy, build the next train. And of course, what Steve's been talking about, building the next train doesn't get you the full train because you haven't got an ECQ approval for that. You would have to get that. To take advantage of the fourth train, you'll have to go back and do a bunch of study to get approval. So you are constrained by the fact you can only build one or two trains. That kind of drives that number, but 15 is reasonable. It's a big, blurry crystal ball here about whether development pressures will continue at the pace they've been going. Nobody in the province knows that, and so you're going to have to make a best guess and ride with it. But if it goes down, I mean, you have to, I said this before to Councillor Dan, but you really have to build one train now, for sure. And so if this development pressure slacks back, eases off for whatever reasons, you've still got your train. You're still responding, and it just means that train will last you longer until this economic role of building houses picks up again.
Yeah, what is also shown here, I didn't mention, was that the difference between one train and two trains is 5 years of capacity. So you push that 2039 number to 2044 and 2036, which is the kind of the trigger at which you decide to actually expand, to 2041. So that is for $4 or $5 million, you can shift that line 5 years.
Excuse me, it's Dave. What scenarios is there? We're talking about bringing in 135 acres of future residential. Does that? How does that? I assume like that one train doesn't go to capacity at that full build out at our next approval of allocating future residential. Would that be a correct statement, or am I wrong?
Dan, this question then for Dan as part of this, or Dan Fitzgerald. So if you get that many acres, Dan, how many units of housing do you think that will support?
Yes, through the chair. So currently right now it's designed at I guess the typical average for density in Lucan, which is at 12.5 units per hectare. So extrapolate from there. It's based on the Watson study's population projection for 2045.
And was that 135 acres or hectares? Acres.
Acres. It's
Acres,
approximately 56 hectares.
Yeah,
Approximately.
56 times 12 and a half, right?
Yeah.
And that's, 688 units. So yeah, to answer Councillor Dave's question, one train will handle that.
And then how much,
Well, I'll interject. We can't disregard the fact the approvals that are out there now. So like within the already
Wow, that's right
approved
too.
urban area, we have approaching 600 units of actual commitments and proposals.
But we have some capacity for that on the plant still, Steve.
We do, but
Yeah, so
but you can't. We're not building. We're not expanding the plant so that you can serve an extra 56 hectares of development.
so my question is, after you extrapolate that and what both of you have said, I guess it sounds like it's an answerable question. What if we were to do one stage at the end of what Dan said was an average, what capacity approximately we had left after if we did one train? That's my question. We approve 135 acres in the next 2 months, just a ballpark.
Yeah.
I know you throw out that 600 and what, but just how much extra capacity that would be in one train after the 135 acres are built out?
my answer would be not much.
Gotcha. Okay. So after we approve, if we approve it sounds like then if we approve one train and we approve the 135 acres, then that's just got us comfortable to that. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. That's a pretty good assessment of. Yeah, we'll be close to that number.
Through the chair, maybe, do you mind if I just? So I would just, the only thing I would state is the density allotment that's used in the municipal comprehensive review is a traditional number. So the 12.5 units per hectare is quite low based on what we're seeing over the last few years. But it is the average spread across the last 15. I would say it's probably more likely going to be in the 14.5 to 15 units per hectare on average. So
Lucan
it's
building.
going to bring you even closer.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, for the first time, we're seeing Lucan going in the air more so than we ever have, too, with high density, with the apartments and things like that.
In our forecasts, how we have worked with them and presented them, we have used the existing sort of recent history of development mix. We didn't use the numbers in the Watson's report. And I think in recent history in Lucan, it's a higher density. That's why we talk about ER, equivalent residential units, and not just units, which might be apartments or townhouses or detached or whatever. But so we're talking equivalent values, and an equivalent value in our definition is based on the recent history in terms of mix. So I think it's a little safer.
And should there be any concern on going to, like, one thing hasn't been brought up, maybe we'll be at the end or in council discussion. We can park this question, but should there be consideration given on doing the expense of 2 trains and how it affects development charges as making us not as competitive within other people within our county, or development charges? It is what it is, and we shouldn't concern ourselves with that as much as we should with having, with having the proper amount of capacity. The development charges, do we talk about that at all or not really?
Well, and we will in the report too, but we can talk about it now because I anticipated we would. And you're right, it's not as important. Anybody that does a sewage plant is going to have high development charges because they want to pay for this $13-15 million thing. Just for raw numbers right now, if you did option 1A, which is a train, you know, raw numbers, that's about $17,100, sort of a single family home. And if you did option 1B, which puts a second train in, but only gives you part use of it, you move that whole number up to 18,500. So about 1,400 bucks.
So
Yeah, it's not that, you know, in range of what we're talking about, it's almost not significant, but because you got more people paying, you know, paying
Yeah.
for it. It depends, you know, this is a number when we do development charges, you're not likely going to play with in terms of, well, municipality will pay a higher portion of that cost because this cost is really strictly a development driven. So you really have to collect it back from them. It's a little different if we're expanding an existing road and you're making some call to the benefit of existing and benefit of future, but here there's no call. You know, you've got to collect this. You got to collect this money back.
Yeah. They're no, it's a no, I mean that makes sense. That number is not too scary actually compared to I think what's out there. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, as a sewage, with what you do traditionally, plus add the sewage plant on it. We were just looking at some numbers the other day in sort of your end of the world. It's, you know, there's some of them are $23,000 and $25,000. Depends what they've done recently, right? And, yeah, I mean, your development charges for 20 years have been in the $5,000-6,000 range, you know, because you haven't had to have big projects on it.
Well, the main reason is because of the grant.
Oh, on the sewage plant, yeah, like it was really cheap.
Yeah, back then, years ago, it was because of the grant that we were able to do this.
Yeah, we carried the sewage plant development charges, but it didn't make a heck of a big dent in it. Not like now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next slide, Lisa. So I've talked about staging and we looked at the economic impacts of that and so on. Now I'm going to talk about the process question. So the key, and I guess what I want to say first is I'm not expecting council to pick a treatment technology. I don't expect that. We're putting this question out there more in terms of establishing whether or not there's an interest in looking at spending more time looking at different technologies. So we haven't analyzed this on the basis of using IFAS because from our engineering perspective, it's the kind of a logical way we'd approach it. But if there's real interest in doing this, we'd look at it in more detail. And anything else, I don't think would be lesser cost. So there might be more cost to look at other things. But the key advantage to converting the process is really occurs then at the 2,700 cubic meter a day number, where we would, at that time, we'd save $1 million. And that really then, that $1 million comes from the fact that we don't have to build a fourth aeration tank. We'd still have a fourth clarifier, but we wouldn't build a fourth aeration tank. So we'd save roughly $1 million. There is a potential argument, and the IFAS people will push this, that it is a greener technology. And there's a huge amount of interest these days in green, and the government likes to support green projects. So if we went in this direction, there'd be an argument that it is greener, but that argument again occurs more at the 2,700 than it does at 2475, because the amount of tankage that you have is considered a negative. The surface area in a wastewater plant is where greenhouse gases come from, and the lesser surface area is the better. So this point is out there, but it is, I don't think it's a deciding factor now, but somebody may argue later. Bring up this point. The disadvantages of changing the process is if we're opting for staging, it costs more initially. Not a big amount. That's only like in the order of less than 5%, but it's still more money. Other disadvantage is that we're introducing a new process that is less proven, and definitely not unproven, but just less proven. And it will have a learning curve for the operators. So it's changing things from the present day scenario, which introduce some complications, but not big factors. It will definitely add materials that have a lesser life expectancy than concrete. So where we'll add the media is plastic or stainless steel. There's different versions, different suppliers approach this, but regardless, we're adding a media that will wear out sooner than a tank. So those are kind of longer term disadvantages as well. But those are what we kind of viewed the pros and cons of changing the process. So any questions about this? Okay, so next slide, please. So go back to, so we've talked about staging, we talked about process. This is what we recommend, BM Ross recommends. It's my opinion that additional $4 or $5 million of cost is not justified by the extra capacity we achieve, 225 cubic meters a day, about 10%. So it's a lot of money for little benefit. By building it in stages, with that first stage being 2475, we're still out there 14, 15 years before you need to start planning for the next stage. The question was asked earlier, is that a reasonable number? I think it's a reasonable number. There's lots that can happen in terms of those over that 14 or 15 years. We might find that there are different technologies that we can take advantage of. We may find the ministry shows up at some point and wants to change the effluent quality criteria. And we can use that $4 or $5 million to address that issue. And that gets, or we may find that we can just simply re-rate, have 3 trains and actually re-rate the plant with how the performance of those things. So it leaves the door open by not building too much, but probably the deciding factor would be that $4 or $5 million upfront that we defer. We don't save it, but we would defer. So that's our recommendation, is that we proceed with this in stages. So any questions?
Steve, just
Yep.
on the re-rating, just so I can remember the process, because I believe that the plant back in 2009, 10, or 11, in that time frame, did go through a re-rating, and that is a significant process. If I remember, I'm kind of looking to Ron. I think maybe when I first came on council, we were in the process of re-rating that, I believe. And it's not an insignificant process. What would, I guess maybe just a Reader's Digest version of what a re-rating process would look like.
Okay, what a lot depends on how big a re-rating you want. In 2010, the plant was re-rated from 1,100 cubic meters a day up to 1,700. So almost 50% increase. So significant effort. If we were doing something on that scale, then the process would be exactly the process we're doing here now, an environmental assessment. The re-rating also involves some construction. Some components of the plant were replaced. There was different things that were done. But by and large, probably the biggest planning effort was environmental assessment, and it's what we're doing today. So does that help? Now, having said that, if we get to we find that the performance is better, and we're thinking about a re-rating, then we might be able to re-rate from 2,475 to 2,700 and not build anything. So that we can do that kind of scale of re-rating up to 2,700 without much physical change.
Okay, great.
So,
Thanks for that. Yeah, thank you.
any other questions? Okay, next slide. So, should we change the process? What's our recommendation? And our recommendation is no, let's stay with the same extended aeration process. I'll probably go to the advantages here. Probably the key advantage is there's no economic advantage in the short term to do it. We can defer. We can all. Point 5 is we can change it. We can still change it in the future. And Councilor Reagan, I think, asked this question way back at the beginning. Can we do this in the future? And the answer is absolutely yes. And when is that future? Well, the future might be when we plan for stage 2, which is again 14 or 15 years down the road. So there's long-term economic advantage to changing the process, but there's no short-term advantage to doing it. And in the short term, and the short term being 14 or 15 years, we get to work with a proven process that's well understood. So although there's, I think, a future opportunity to change the process and advantages to doing it, at this point in time, with a staged expansion, our recommendation, let's stay with what we've got and what we know. So any questions? Okay.
Ron's got his hand up, Steve.
Thank you, Madam.
Ron?
Through you to Steve. Steve, I didn't, in that one drawing you had, the sludge storage. Now we know we've already got issues with sludge storage, and I didn't really see anything in your presentation about expansion to the sludge storage. Can you just maybe talk a little bit about what the plan is for that?
Sure. Lisa, can you flip back to those slides? Sure, this is a good one. So in the sort of lower right is the existing sludge treatment and storage facility. So in a wastewater treatment process, we produce this material called sludge or biosolids. And that's where it's treated and stored, and periodically it's trucked off site and spread on farmland. One of the components of the expansion is that we must increase our ability to treat and store biosolids. So that rectangle, or essentially square, I guess, that square, if we do it on site, is going to have to be almost 150% bigger. So that's a large component of the expansion cost, but it's common. How that happens is the same regardless of which process we use. It's not a process question, but we can build. We have space on site, definitely, to build the tankage we need to expand that, and that will be in some form part of what we do. We are looking at the opportunities of storing offsite, and it'll come up at some point in discussion that we're looking at the ability to store in existing lagoons. But that's something that will be kind of a further discussed in more detail further. But and we would do that for economic reasons, I think. So does that answer the question, Ron? Does it give you what you need?
No, I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Okay. So in the big picture summary here, where our recommendation is, let's proceed on the basis of stages, and let's proceed on the basis of staying with the existing process. I think those are the best kind of engineering decisions at this point in time. So next slide.
When we talk, and maybe this is the next slide coming, I don't know, or future slides, but when we think about the cost of the project, and certainly we know that it is development driven, and that development will have to bear the brunt of the costs. But if I can think back to past conversations, there will be a cost to our existing system to expand, correct?
Well, yes, definitely. You have to expand. You're essentially fully allocated, and there's a cost to do that. And the costs that we presented here probably, show you that cost will be $13 million.
I think the mayor was getting at, is some of this split with the existing base?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, we've had that discussion, and there's work to be done at the sewage pumping station to feed all this. That's been somewhat designed now, and that benefits both stages of this, the existing. So that'll be some of that will be transferred over, but that's not included in these costs as far as I know, Steve.
Well, no, it is included, but so you can't. I think that this is the question is, you can't charge future development for any deficiencies that you have. Mm-hmm. So the biggest deficiency that needs to be addressed here is the biosolids or sludge storage facility and so on. So there'll be a fairly hefty piece of that can't be applied to development charges, but I would think the balance of the rest of it mostly can.
I just think that is an important point that we consistently make during these discussions, because I think that that our users need to know that there will be costs that will have to be borne by the existing system, that yes, the majority of it will be taken on by development, but our users will have to pay for some of this as well.
Right. Yeah, good point.
We'll identify that in the environmental study report. So it's there. And I don't know what it will be if, but it does reduce development charges and spreads it back onto the base.
Okay, thanks.
Ron, can I just, Madam Mayor, can I just say something?
Absolutely.
And I'll just add, we do factor in on our capital reserves replacement of infrastructure. And the plant, if we were not to expand, the plant will wear out and it would have to be replaced and items would have to be upgraded as they age. So we are appropriately collecting capital reserves for replacement, and that's part of that program. So I just want to make sure everybody, as we're stating these things, that there is a plan in place for capital expenditures.
So next slide, Lisa. I think we're almost right at the end here. So the next steps, like we are throughout all of this, we have been writing the report, and we're really at the point in our study and writing that report where we need council to decide on this, the size of the plant, which is the staging question, and the treatment approach. Do we stay with the status quo or investigate further the possibility of change? So that's why the primary purpose of this meeting and presentation was to get the information out there to council to allow you to make a decision on those issues. And then there'll be a further public meeting to wrap this thing up, but like before it's finished. But once that, we wouldn't have that till likely we have a draft environmental study report. So maybe you want to expand on that a bit too, Matt. I don't know.
Yeah, if Lisa, you go back to slide 4, maybe the timeline chart. There. Yeah. So there's a public consultation process at the end of the Class CA process, and part of that is a public meeting, just to, you get the report out there in draft, you have a public meeting to talk about it. It gets circulated to quite a few agencies, and we collect comments back, and even after that, once it's all out there and we do final, there's 30-day objection period if somebody wanted to object to it. Hopefully we've covered off everything by then. At some point, we'll come to council and ask for a decision to do that, like to accept the ESR. So you'll see the draft first, and it'll have everything in it we've been talking about for the year. As Steve said, the ESR is being written. The rest of it really depends on the decision needed by council now on size, and everything gets wrapped around that. We ended up doing an archaeological assessment of the undeveloped lands at the sewage plant because it wasn't done. There was no archaeological assessment 30 years ago. We determined that through records, and that's fine. I don't know if they're finished yet, Lisa, but we suspect they haven't found anything. And so other than that, it's gone along really well. The final report will have numbers in it. The development industry will be interested in the numbers, but we're in that range now. And we talked about 17, 18,000, 15. I mean, if $1 million of the cost went to the existing development base, as Jeff said, the capital reserves, that takes $1,000 off each development charge. I mean, that's the scale we're talking about. So it's significant, but it's not game changing. Okay, yeah, public meeting date, we can't set yet. Ron had asked me a question there. I think we want to wait till we've got a final report we're all happy with. And we've got Christmas coming up. This is going to be in the new year. I mean, you lose a lot of December anyway, but again, it's contingent. I'm not going to pressure council, but we're going to need a decision. You know, when we get that decision, we'll move on with this, you know, to finish it up. But other than that, we're sort of in line with what we discussed earlier. That's really unusual. Sometimes these things get caught on something and drag out. So we're kind of happy at that. And post all that, it goes into a design phase, which can't remember. I think we probably allocated a year to that, and it needs approvals process, and then you can go to build, and that shortens that period. That gives, I'm not in this. The sooner you go to build, the sooner council can start allocating future development out to people again who are going to be lined up to want it, because you're making decisions on the you know, the official plan too. So if we can keep that little, I know we have 7 years left of the plan, but we don't want to build it in year 7. You know, you want to move on.
Councilor Regan's got his hand up. And
Thank you,
then,
Madam Mayor. Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to follow up on something I believe was your question. When we come to the final public information meeting, where all of the costs are, again, all of the costs are going to be out there, and again, you may have already answered this, but will we know exactly if there will be, or how much it will be, any additional costs or fees to current residents? Is that something that will also be available? And again, this is my first time through the process, so I'm just asking because I know this is going to, I mean, it's a very expensive project. I know that there's, you know, it's through development charges, and I know it's user driven, I believe, but I'm just wondering if we'll be able to, when we speak to this, we'll be able to be very clear as to what the increases would be to our current residents, or if that's even a valid question. I don't know.
No, I think as much as we can, we'll identify what part of that project we would allocate to the existing development, existing system. How you collect that, you'll probably collect that through your rate charge system you've got set up. As Jeff was talking about, you've got a capital reserve going that will contribute to that. I wouldn't expect you're going to levy a charge to every user, like independently. But that can be, I've seen it done. It's just not usually done in bigger systems that are established. So, so you probably collect it in your rate charges. Does that mean your rate charges go up? Maybe. They'll be going up all the time anyway for your capital reserves. You're fixing things up anyway, your asset management plan, and then your operating costs. So all those things cause that rate to go. But we'll try and identify as best as possible what part of the, you know, getting this plant going at a new capacity is attributable to existing base.
All right. Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
okay. And then the deputy mayor had a question.
A question, how do you apply the financing to the development charges? Like, I'm just thinking, like at $10 million, if it's a 4% interest only, would be $400,000 a year. So year one of the plant, I think, now you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think when you did that quick math on development charges, that was, I believe, principal only. But it's amazing that kind of loan, when we're all guessing our interest rates will be in 3 years. But if carrying cost of that will be around $400,000 a year, which is huge. So was your calculation
Straight capital? I just you know, use the capital upfront charge. You're right. We can develop a spreadsheet on this project that will show income coming in and development charge collected, and against that, and we'll apply, you know, the 20-year government interest rate to it, and show how much interest, because we can collect interest in the development charges.
Yeah, so good. No, the public meeting or the next one, I think that'll be an important expense to have in there included. Yeah.
No, in a size this project it winds up, you're still fortunate. We're still living in a very reduced interest rate environment, and but you're right, they're going up. So the 20-year rate maybe. The 20-year rate may be 4% by the time we go to construction, right? And
exactly,
it's likely about 1.65 right now or something. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
It still amounts to a lot. Yeah.
Oh yeah, 13 million would be 500,000 a year carrying costs.
Yeah, so
Okay, no, good, thank you.
All right. Was there any other discussion to be had? Okay, well, you've gone over the next steps. It's a lot of information for all of us to digest for sure. Certainly appreciate the time being taken. Oh, I see Jeff's hand up.
Madam Mayor, if I could, I was kind of leaving this to the very end because I didn't want to cloud the true discussion here. And I think Steve's done an excellent job at bringing all the information forward. I do have one question, and I know our current process works. That's what we're really looking at expanding. My one question would be, like, in this municipality, there's two advantages we have. One is the lagoons, and we did slightly talk about that. And the other advantage is we do have considerable land around the plant itself. So we're not constricted by additional processes if they took up space. My question is, at what point, or is there a point in this process of expansion, do we look at a different addition to the process, or a greener process that could be added sooner than later, or is that complicating the process that we have in place right now? So for instance, like, should we be looking at using the lagoons more, or should we be looking at a different wetland, a constructed wetland of some sort? Is there a place for doing that, I guess, is my question to Steve.
The difficult question. There's the opportunity to look at those things. Anything that we do like that to make this greener will add to the costs. We're sort of proposing. We know what we have, and we're proposing to make it bigger. The green question is really another question, and if there was interest in how that might be done, we could investigate that, but it's not. And we haven't done that today. We haven't really looked at it, other than I noted that an approach like IFAS is being marketed as greener technology. That's the extent that we've looked at it up to this point in time. So I don't know if that helps you, Jeff, or not, but
no, and I think that's I wanted to bring that question up just so, because I know it does lie in the background, and I think one of the things that part of our process that we have in place right now is a proven process, and it's a fairly straightforward process, and it works. But I just didn't know it, at some point, if it's worth, I guess, going outside and looking at different processes. But you're right, Steve, it will cost. There's a cost to that.
Sure.
And at what point that brings. I just bring that up just because I just wanted to add it to the meeting. So
okay. Certainly in the kind of detailed design of the expansion, there'll be a number of changes made. I mean, the equipment, motors today are more efficient. Drives can be made by variable frequency. So in the design, we will design to kind of current technology and equipment, which is greener than it was 10 years ago. So all of those kinds of considerations in terms of making it greener will be done, would be kind of a normal course of how we'd approach a project like this today. But we aren't, up to this point in time, we haven't looked at any kind of big scale thing like, do you build a green roof? Do you do, wetland? We haven't looked at those kind of things, and they will cost more.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
I might just jump in with that. Thanks for bringing that up, Jeff, because I think that behind the scenes, I think we've had very informal discussions about the opportunity to be green. It's, there's certainly grants available, but it sounds like the actual process to become more green would cost more money. So maybe that's not where we look for the green aspect of the plant. So I'm happy, Steve, to hear you say that in other areas of the expansion of upgrading the plant itself, where there's opportunity to be green, we can be. And, as I say, I know there's lots of grant opportunities out there, and maybe that's where we kind of utilize those to our advantage.
Yeah, one of the things that for Jeff and Mayor Kathy, over the years, this comes up when we're doing expansions of plants. A lot of people read things, they see things, you hear about engineered wetlands, and it sounds pretty sexy, and a lot of this stuff's done on a very small pilot scale to see if that works, right? They were doing one out in the East Coast in greenhouses. So all the sewage ran through a series of greenhouses and got cleaned by the plants. But as you get bigger, that scale doesn't translate very well. One of the things about engineered wetlands is that's exactly what they are. Everything in them is kind of artificial until you get to the plants. You've got to dig it out. You've got to put soils in. You've got to make sure that the flows can be handled and take it out. And they best work where you already had wetlands. I mean, putting it on just a piece of land because you got land doesn't necessarily work or hasn't worked in the past. So you actually hear less about that type of thing now, especially on a bigger scale.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt.
Okay, I guess one last call for comments or discussion. We've got our next steps, so I guess we really think that the decision will be asked of us probably the beginning of the new year. In that time frame, you'll come back with having to make that decision then?
Well, no, the first decision we're going to need before that, if we can, is which way you're going with this.
Oh, okay. I thought that's what we were.
Second decision in the new year will be approval of the final report for circulation.
So if
the
we
whole thing packaged together.
Okay. So
can't let you off the hook that easy.
I guess then we can talk to, I can circle back with staff as to when they think that recommendation would be coming to council. As I say, there's lots of information that we've been given today, and I know that the team is really good at getting back to us. So, I mean, I would encourage council that if you review the presentation from today and you've got more questions, to certainly reach out to Steve or Matt or Lisa, and we can get those questions clarified. But if there's nothing else, I guess I will thank you for the presentation. It's informative. As I say, in the technical meetings, I never ever thought that this would be something that I would learn so much about and be able to have a, semi fluid conversation about, but it's interesting. This means big things for our community. So let's take the time to put into looking back at the report and thinking about our recommendation in the time to come. So with that, I will ask for a motion to adjourn. We don't have to pass a bylaw or anything, do we, Tina? Because it's just a public meeting for information. Oh, do we have to accept? We just have to accept it for information?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. So a motion to accept the report that was presented for information, please. Councillor Regan, Councillor Westman, all opposed? That's carried. And then a motion to adjourn at 10:41 a.m. Please. Deputy Mayor Manders and Councillor Regan, all opposed? That's carried. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend and we'll talk soon.